Hi, everyone. My name is Kirk Bachman, and welcome back to The Ultimate Dish. In today's episode, we're speaking with Chef Colette Christian, a certified master baker, Escoffier baking and pastry chef instructor, author, and creator, and host of Baking with Colette. Chef Colette is a Chicago native who began working in restaurants at 14. Since that time, she's worked in upscale restaurants, luxury hotels. She's run a bed and breakfast as both the chef and the pastry chef. And she also ran a successful wedding cake business. She's a certified executive chef, executive pastry chef, and she's an evaluator for certifications for the American Culinary Federation. She has taught at the Cordon Bleu College of Culinary Arts and has been teaching baking and pastry classes for over a decade as the dough doctor. Join us today as we chat with Chef Colette about becoming a certified master baker, her role as an educator in the industry, and what it's like to bake with Colette. Welcome, Chef. Thank you so much for chatting with us this morning. I'm exhausted. I'm out of breath doing your intro.
Thank you, Shepard. Great to be here.
Wonderful. And I'm so sorry. Well, first I was going to apologize for being so early. You're on the West Coast, but you're a baker, so you've probably been up for hours, right?
I have. I'm actually not baking early anymore, but my last bakery, my call time with my alarm was set for 3:45.
Ouch,
So
ouch, ouch. But you know, I'm gonna kick off right off the bat that, you know, I grew up in that sort of family. My folks came over from Germany in the early 60s, and my father, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is a master baker as well, according to the German standards. They call it a Meisterbrief, right? But growing up for us was, you know, Dad would go down to the bakery at 11 p.m., work throughout the day, and not come back up to the flat until, I don't know, 2 or 3 in the afternoon, from which time we had to be silent so that he could relax a little bit and then go to bed at 6 and do it all again. How does that, it kind of leads into my question of how do you fall in love with baking, knowing that that's what's ahead of you, working when no one else is?
well, there's a certain piece to that, chef. There's a certain, so much can be done in the quiet hours between like 5 and 9 in the morning. And every early bird knows this, but every baker knows this as well. That's when I think the bulk of the week, the work is done. So I think that peacefulness, but as far as falling in love with baking, and cooking, but especially baking, and I'm very specific about this. We need to eat to live, and there's no shade on cooking. Like, cooking is wonderful, but baking is something extra. It's part of our celebratory life, at all stages of life. There's a cake or there's a special dessert, there's something commemorating those touchstones, those touch points in our life. And then also, it's such an easy way to lighten someone's day and spread joy. My parents had a very tumultuous, to put it lightly, marriage until they finally divorced. But I found, as like a 9 and 10-year-old, when I started really messing around in the kitchen and blowing up easy bake ovens, that I could stop them from arguing by making something yummy and delicious. So that was like the light bulb kind of went off in my head. And I'm like, I really enjoy doing this. And then I started working in restaurants when I was 14. I'm a Chicago native. So I started working in the mall at Water Tower Place at a lovely little health food cafe. And the genesis of getting that job and really working, well, you're not a professional when you're 14, but working in a restaurant was a bread baking class that I took in high school that our geometry teacher hosted. That's when I was really hooked. She explained, it was years ago, bread baking was a little bit different, but she just got enough into my head where I was completely dialed in, and then got that job in that cafe.
Isn't it amazing how so many chefs, so many people we talk with think back on a mentor, somebody, whether it's a grandma or a teacher who inspired them. I absolutely love that. Did you grow up in the city?
I did. I grew up on the Gold Coast. I
Oh, wow. Okay.
grew up, I had a very strange childhood. I mean, it was normal for us, but I don't think people think it's normal to grow up on the 34th floor or the 52nd floor of a building. But I
I,
did.
I think people dream of that, right? I mean, that's Chicago. I grew up probably about 8 miles from you then. Irving and Austin is where
Okay.
my family had the bakery. Yeah.
I grew up at Lake Point Tower, and then I swear I had the smallest apartment. I loved it though, in the
Yeah.
John Hancock Tower.
Yeah. Which probably cost $10 million today, right?
At the time, I mean, have to work my tail off. It was this teeny tiny studio. The view was amazing. The clouds would nest around my windows. The pool was fabulous, and I'm a deem. I swim every day. So
Oh, great.
for as a good part of my life, it was worth every penny.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that. I love that. So let's talk about those early moments. You started to touch on it. I love those kind of stories. So it's a teacher um, in school that sort of inspired you,
Miss
and
Kelly.
and then some of the, the challenges that you had at home. So this kind of puts you into your own world. By the way, it took years for me to realize that there really is a light bulb in the Easy Bake Oven. It's like I never thought to look until my girls were growing up. But what was it about that inspiration from that teacher that kept you going? So you're 14, and are you thinking about this seriously as a career?
I began to, yes. So so my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who died before I was born, had gone to. She was like the mythic cook in the family, and she had taken classes at a cooking school, not a culinary school, chef, but a cooking school in Chicago called the Antoinette Pope School of Fine Cookery. And this was
Wow.
a couple, husband and wife team. Wife was Italian, husband was French, and they started in the 1920s in their basement. And in the end, when the school closed in the 60s, they had a daily radio, well, in the 50s, they had a daily radio program and a locally produced TV show. And their school was like on Michigan Avenue. So they went from very humble, they published books. She took every class they they offered. So and my mother didn't cook. She was a model. And so I didn't, but my mother did give me my grandmother's she gave me her books and her notebooks. But I didn't quite understand what was going on. But that bread baking class, Mrs. Borelli explained it specifically about how yeast worked, and I was off and running. Then I got Beard on Bread, which was published in 1977, Fannie Farmer baking book, and I started, you know. And then at the end of high school, I applied to the Culinary Institute of America. I was accepted, but my mother was diagnosed with her last and final breast cancer. I couldn't leave. There was no cooking school in Chicago except for Washburn.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
mother would have had a stroke and died right then and there if I had gone all the way every day. So I ended up I mean, I had to go to school. I was taking care of her. I was working. I was still modeling. I modeled as well. I had like so many jobs. And then I had to go to school.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
started working on a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the School of the Art Institute, right? You know, the school that's behind the museum.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that story, and I love the commitment to family. That's another great theme when it comes to, talking to chefs about their careers, their love for family. And yeah, yeah. Talk a little bit more about um how you believe your love for all things food, baking in particular, um, maybe changed your family's life a little bit as you
Well,
got older?
in the end, it was just my mother and I. When she passed away, I had no living relatives.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
I basically, a few years later, I married and had my son. So I was basically alone in the world. And thank God, though, my boyfriend at the time, who would become my husband, I had him. But as far as blood relatives, gone. Everybody was gone. And I don't mean that in a sad, maudlin way, but it did give me a different perspective. It wasn't like I had big family gatherings and crowds of people to cook for. Everything was pretty, I don't know, small, I guess is the only word I can think of. So I basically, it was just working part-time in restaurants. Then, then my first husband and I moved to California. Oh, and one very important thing, Chef Kurt, something we don't think about too much anymore, but I did try to work in fine dining in Chicago during those years. And so by now I'm like 17, 18 years old. And I was told more than once that I was too pretty to work in the kitchen. And I was offered, oh, you can check the coats. Would you like to check the coats? Yeah.
Can you imagine that happening today?
Oh,
Imagine that happening today. But before I let you off, I mean, just a word of congratulations and appreciation for the strength and courage that it must have taken to continue to pursue your dreams in the absence of any family. That's an amazing story, Chef. It really is.
thank you, Chef. I didn't think about it. It was just the way I mean, it was the way I was wired. My mother was very much into, you know, she, she was a tiger mom before there were tiger moms, and you always did your best and you shot for the stars. And I think that set me up really well to go to good schools, have amazing instructors myself, and starting back with Mrs. Borelli in that long ago geometry class. But I set my sights on teaching because of the teachers I had. And some I had like in programs, and some I just was with like for 3 weeks of my life. Like, for example, I may be one of the last bakers alive to have studied with Chef Albert Kumin, the great White House pastry chef,
Yeah, absolutely.
chef of Windows on the World in New York when it opened in 1976. Just an amazing, I mean, he was a certified master baker's master baker. All right. So just to put it in the way I like elevators, if I have to do an elevator pitch, I always say I had a Forrest Gump career. I was in the right place at the right time, and I had mentors that people would just kill for.
I love it. I love it. Spoken like a teacher, by the way. Um, so let's here comes the silly question, right? That you probably get asked all the time. What's your favorite thing? And now that I know that you have more of a kind of a balanced interest in savory and sweet, feel free to go either way. But what's your favorite thing to bake? Is it I'm going to guess macarons, but I don't know because of the book and
I do love making macarons. And it took me 3 years to write that book, and credit to Armor Ready Flavorings because they sponsored me and
okay.
published the book. And it's
It's
beautiful.
beautiful, beautiful, beautiful book. Yeah.
And where I'm hoping to encourage them to put it on Amazon. Right now it's only available through armorready.com, but it's definitely findable. And so here's the thing. I do enjoy making macarons, but not it took me 3 years to write the book, and I spent weekends from 2012 to 2020 teaching baking at my local Sur La Table. The Sur La Table, which has before the pandemic, and still some to this day, though they have been sold, we had cooking classes and we sold beautiful cookware. And their flagship store here in Los Angeles at the Grove, I taught there like on the weekends. I did hundreds of macaron classes. The whole West Side, they can make macarons because of me. So I'm going to confess here on the podcast, I got burnt out.
Okay, that's fair.
That's
fair.
All pandemic. And I have to say, when the pandemic hit and Sur La Table closed and all the changes happened, thank God for Escoffier, I would have gone right out the window. But my heart broke. And so that's where I just didn't really make macarons until a couple weeks ago when I did a blog post about a shamrock macaron on my Instagram. So I would say not macarons. My holy grail at the moment is a deeper dive into croissants, so that possibly, maybe in collaboration with Chef Gina from Escoffier, we write a book on laminated doughs.
I love it. I love it.
So I would say right now, what's going to get me up out of this chair and into the kitchen, besides content creation, would be, all right, let's nail croissants in book form.
I love the passion to because there's no doubt that you're probably very proficient in croissant making, but yet you want to take it to the next level. You mentioned Holy Grail, which reminded me that you have a superpower. Is that something you can share with our listeners?
I have two superpowers.
Okay. Okay.
My first superpower, and I don't mean to sound like I'm all that in a bag of chips, because I'm not. I work every day to grow my skill set. But it occurred to me, especially after being a Craftsy instructor for many years, and the first two iterations of Craftsy, original Craftsy, and then Craftsy.com, owned by NBC Universal, was constant questions from students. I would say I have easily had over 100,000 Craftsy students between the 8 classes I teach on Craftsy.com. And for years, I logged on several times a day answering questions. So that set me up to really be good at that. Then, being a regular on-ground instructor and now an online instructor and answering students' questions, messaging, blah, 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 it's something that I realized I love doing, and I can do it without all the arduous prep of a demo. And it's actually a service, because if my followers and my bakers listen to my Dough Doctor show on Saturday on Instagram Live and they bring their questions, I can answer them tickety-boo right out of the gate and get them back into the kitchen baking without them having had gone on the internet trying to find the answer and having that internet brain drain. And whoever they find, that expertise could be great, that expertise could be not great. So back in the day, you would, if you're whoever was the person in your life who was the baker, right, chef? You'd ask them. You'd ask your dad, hey, Dad, I have a question. He's a master baker. You'd ask him. But what if you didn't have your dad? You got to have somebody, right? You know,
someone you trust, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I want to be that person. Plus, every week, the way I set it up is on Fridays, there's a post that asks for questions. The questions come in. I do my background work so that I can answer cleanly and efficiently and get them back into the kitchen baking, which is what they really love. And I'm sure you notice this too. If you're searching on the internet for something and you're searching and is this right? Is that right? It's exhausting.
Oh, sure.
Okay, do I really want to go start those croissants now? But you come to the dough doctor, I answer your question about yeast. You're like, great. And you're off and running. Not you, chef, you have your dad, but you know what I'm saying.
Sure. Well, you know what I love about that from a purely academic perspective, this idea of Q&A, this idea of needs analysis, right? When students ask you questions, they're almost serendipitously, subliminally kind of telling you what they don't know or what they do know, right? That's why we always encourage our instructors, start your lesson with asking your students what they know or what they think or what they'd like to know, because then you can get right to the context, right? So to your point, when you're on the internet searching and searching and searching, you start to forget what you're searching for, right? So that's superpower number one, right? What's superpower number two?
Forgive me if I sound grandiose, but I think I inspire people to bake.
And I don't know if there's a first and a second. I think those are both on the top podium. If you're able to answer people's questions, right? Self-esteem comes into play, right? I always think about young students, elementary school, middle school. Self-esteem doesn't come into place, right? A teacher asks a question, 1,000 hands go up. They don't know the right answer. They just want to be engaged, right? But when you start working with adult learners, self-esteem is on the line. So sometimes they keep their hands down because they don't want to be that person in the back of the room asking if the report has to be typed, right? That kind of thing. So if you're able to coax people, students, to ask questions, and then at the same time inspire them, I can't think of two better superpowers to have, right?
That's why I'm so in love with my Dough Doctor brand. Like, really am in love with this brand. And I'm so grateful that the synapse fired and I got out of I still do it, chef. I create, I have the recipes, I have the website, and I maintain, I try to put inspiring content on there that people would want to bake. But I had to distill it down. What is my real gift? At this point in my life and career and all these decades of experience, what can I give to the baking world that's truly useful?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and it feels like it's growing every week. And I've started adding a little demo in there. So, piggybacking off of one of the questions, like last week, I tempered chocolate in about 6 minutes because there were these chocolate questions coming in. So it all kind of feeds together, and I don't know where it's going. And actually, I don't care if it just stays in this apartment forever with my iPad, because it's wonderful to reach them and know that this community is building and people are having more satisfying baking experiences. One last thought, because here's the thing, both with our culinary students and any home baking audience we cultivate, the better they bake, the more successful their outcomes. The more they will bake. Baking is one of those hobbies that if things consistently go not well, it is the easiest thing to shove the mixer to the back, close the cupboard,
move on. Yeah.
Move on.
Yeah. Well, the good news is that our the even better news is that our Escoffier students reap the benefits of your passion and your superpowers as well. So that's greatly appreciated. So let's talk about you for a second. So this is big. Becoming a certified master baker is no small feat. And I don't know all the details. I just have the context of my father's experience, right? But I believe you have to complete up to 8 years of experience, tons of hours of education, exams, testing, right? Practical testing of your knowledge. I know that when my father went through it, it was mandatory to have at least a 3-year apprenticeship and a 6-year journeymanship in order to hold that title, and in order to just own a bakery in Germany. You could work in a bakery, but you couldn't own one unless you were a Meister. So, walk us through that journey, and as you're sharing, Chef, I think it's super important to explain why. Why was it so important for you to become the highest level or reach the highest level of that craft?
Well, Chef, I'm an overachiever. So that's number one. Number two, I have to credit my ex-husband. He was very involved with the ACF. So the precursor to my CMB, which is from Retail Bakers Association,
Okay.
was my ex-husband's involvement with the ACF, his going for certifications. It was something we could do together, training for our certifications, going for our certifications, and then actually competing as well, because we did that. And so I would be remiss if I didn't credit him. He really knew how to flip that switch in me to be like, yeah, let's do this, let's go. And I really, maybe it was something from way back when, from not being able to work in a nice kitchen and like a fine dining kitchen as a late teenager. But for example, and I don't mean this in a sexist way, and I'm not really a great feminist, but it was a lot more challenging for women. Like, for example, certified executive chef, certified executive pastry chef, there's not a lot of female chefs that hold both titles. So when I found that out, I was like, yeah, I want that. So going for that. And then the CMB, there are more male chefs that hold that title than women. But here's the other thing that's really interesting is that when I started to go, I already had my ACF certifications. I was already working as an evaluator, and I got it and my ex-husband had he wasn't going to become a CMB, though he was super helpful, helping me train, like he did my dishes, especially when I got toward the crunch. But the thing that I liked about the CMB is once you have it, you have it. You don't have, not like ACF where you have to keep paying and you have to keep earning points. It's yours for life. Also,
Okay. Yeah.
and I was like, yeah, because sometimes life hits its curveballs like cancer and pandemics and divorce, and you don't always have the funds to pay those ACF dues. And so, I liked that. That was mine for life. And so I started on that journey, and I did the CB, the certified baker, first, because I was really used to ACF and I wanted to see how this worked. So the first rung was an 8-hour baking session. Of course, they combed through your work history and interviewed you. Of course, there was a baking exam with that. And then that I passed with flying colors, no problem. But the CMB is 2 solid days of baking, more exams, and chef, they weigh, it's production based. It's not 4 danishes. It's not 4 plated desserts like the CEPC. It's 32 danishes, and they weigh every one. It's not 2 baguettes. It's not a batch of rolls like the CEC. It was 12 baguettes with perfect ears.
Looking for consistency and
well, no, if you're a certified master baker, it's all about the law. You can't sell things that are under. Like in the like
okay, makes sense. Yeah.
So there were components for the CMB that were really difficult. but I had some great mentors helping me with the CMB, like Chef Crawford, who wrote this amazing book on owning a bakery. But what now, and I don't mean like, one thing I did, and I thought once I got my CMB, the committee would come to the door. Like when Chef Crawford got his CMB, Wiley offered him a book deal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The committee hasn't quite come to the door. I so appreciate you talking about it. It has given me, I have a lot of pride that I have my CMB, and it was worth it. I probably put at least $10,000 into the training.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I traveled. My first CMB was done in San Antonio at CIA there. And full disclosure, wait for it, I failed my challah. All right.
And you learn from it.
And some of the best bakers on the planet who have their certification failed at least one thing. And so, but if you fail only one part of this 8-part exam, they let you go to the next exam and retake it. So I passed my challah at Kendall in Chicago and was awarded my CMB.
Oh, that must have been, I mean, to be able to pass that in Chicago, I bet that was heartwarming, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. In your hometown.
You cannot proof challah with a lot of humidity because the humidity melds the strands together.
Sure.
Done in San Antonio because, I'm sure the judges watched me do it. The judges are right there, Chef, right there.
Yeah, yeah.
Had a communal proof box set at 76% humidity. Instead of proofing my challah on my bench, I just threw it in the proof box. So I failed because my strands melded together.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm very grateful to RBA that I was able just to do one, because if you fail more than one, you do the whole thing again.
Do the whole test again. What, as we speak of this, I'm thinking of students and kind of a 2-part question. I so appreciate the journey and your transparency and your vulnerability as we discuss this, but kind of 2-part. What's the best way? Because this is intense, right? This is stressful for some people, right? What's the best way, number one, to introduce young people not only to the craft of baking, but to take their game to the levels that you had? And the second part of the question is, there'll be other bakers that listen to this conversation that think to themselves, wow, I want to challenge myself. So what's the advice for them to get involved with this program?
Number one, check your ego and leave it at the door. If you are an established baker and you want to go for your CMB, do the CB, the certified baker, first. I saw a lot of CMB candidates who were, like corporate chefs of corporations. I won't drop names, but big one chef. Mm-hmm. Just came into the CMB and failed, right? The failure rate's intense because it's really, can you imagine decorating a cake with a chef standing there? Your judge has a stopwatch on you.
Especially when you're used to being in charge, right? Then all of a sudden you're the student. Yeah.
Do the lower level first. Check your ego at the door. And know that this could be a 2.5 year process. So because they're usually 6 months apart. And then, so do that CB and do well and feel the vibe of the of the room, of the judges. It's different from ACF. It's longer. Mm-hmm. And I feel that the coterie of judges for RBA is a little bit more close knit as opposed to ACF. It's not always, it's a little bit more far flung because the head, the person who's hosting the certifications got to get those judges in there and people's availability. As I said, it's not. I feel, God, I apologize. I'm kind of like stumbling over my words. Take the lower level, learn the room, learn the vibe, learn the judges, go home, train for that CMB.
Yeah,
And
it's not a one and done, right? It's you've got to be committed to the long run.
and even look at ACF for CEC, even for CWPC, and even for the I forgot the lowest one, chef, but
The fundamental chefs, yeah, yeah. Or CC, yeah, yeah.
you have to train for it.
Sure,
You
sure.
have to do more than one. And the first thing the judges ask for both ACF, I know I ask it when I'm evaluating for ACF and then certified CB or CMB, how long did you practice? How many times have you run through this thing?
I love that question, and I've heard that question back in the day when when I used to compete. Those were the questions that you prepared for when a judge came by and just said, how many times did you try this?
And to back onto something you just said, Chef, compete. Now, I'm a little worried in our post COVID world. I think for young culinarians, the best way to train for certification is competition.
Sure,
It
sure.
kind of massages. It can either pump you up if you do really well, or if you kind of think like you're all that, and then you get, a CMPC or CMC takes you to task, then you know what you need to work on. So I really hope, I really believe, I don't know how we can do it. Maybe we got to put our heads together on the Escoffier. I don't know, but how we can bring competitions back, because that is just, especially then that switch flips. They get that taste of what it feels like to do well, to have that sense of accomplishment, and that I really feel is a great starting point for young culinarians.
That's great advice, and it reminds me. I'll give a little plug for what went on last week. We had both at our Austin campus, our Boulder campus, and virtually, we had the Young Escoffier competition for high school students. And I have to say, Chef, this past Friday we had it here in Boulder. When we announced the winners, these students screamed. They were so excited. And to your point, it's been a couple of years before we've had live events, or since we've had live events. And it was real. There are a lot of young people who enjoy being in the kitchen, and they love the sense of competition. It's stressful, right? And God bless those competition coaches and teachers and counselors who do this year after year after year on tight budgets, right? To promote culinary education in their classrooms and their kitchens. We're starting to get towards the end of our chat, but I really want to touch on, in your mind, with all of the years of experience and the engagement in certification and your commitment to social media and training and mentoring, when it comes to building skills and even business acumen, right, in our industry around our craft. You mentioned, how important, consistency is, and the legal behind it, right? What are some of the most important lessons that Chef Colette has learned along the way, even if you fell down and had to pick yourself up again? I think these are great things to share with students.
Well, I fell down a lot. I think what if, especially chef, we have a real spirit of culinary entrepreneurship. And I would say the bulk of our students, instead of thinking, oh, I'm going to go work at this restaurant or that restaurant, which was more like, I feel, my generation of up and coming culinarians, it's all about, like I said, a lot of entrepreneurship. So number one, time management. It's no fun
Right.
doing a wedding cake for an order at 5 in the morning of the day that it's, that it's due. So really having strong time management skills, knowing, number 2, do not wait until you feel like doing it because it will be too late. So do it, whatever it is, whether it's an assignment, whether it's an order, get it up on its feet quickly. Because honestly, in life, Chef, the only thing we can control is our preparation. That's it. We can't control just think about Ukraine. We can't control anything else. Be faithful to the math, especially with baking, also with cooking, but especially with baking. Lose your fear of math. I talked about when I teach the cake class, I go hard on bakers' math, and they're kind of like, whoa, what's she doing? We're making cakes here. But the magic is, if you can calculate your batter correctly, you never, and it's always those late nights, you never come up short and have to start over mixing again, whether it's the batter or the buttercream. And when I had my wedding cake business it was at my bed and breakfast. And I had a young child and a husband and guests. And when I was in the weeds with a wedding cake, it was not only 4:00 in the morning, and I had to prepare breakfast for our guests, and I was working on this wedding cake, but my 2-year-old had a fever or the sniffles. So get your stuff up, get it up, start early, time management, embrace the math. And with our Escoffier tutors, there's no reason not to get that help. And then embrace the business. Even something so simple as making sure, let's say you're doing a home business, make sure that the way you're taking your payments is separate from your own personal account. Small details. So time management, embrace the math, learn enough basic business like in our classes, that follow it, and know the laws in your jurisdiction. If you are on the if you're going to jump on the entrepreneurial bandwagon.
I love that advice. That's total TikTok advice right there. Here's the podium: time management, urgency, embrace the math and the business. Absolutely great advice. Here's the I just keep coming up with questions. I apologize, Chef. There's so much. We're probably going to have to do a part 2 at some point. But here's the Letterman question: baking, science or art?
It's really science. Here's the thing. It's science with art on top of it. Once you learn the science, then and the technique, you can become as creative as possible. As an instructor, I'm very strict. I know I break their hearts left, right, and center, especially in the cake class. Because we'll have our specific assignments, and the students will say, can I do another cake? Can I make the buttercream chocolate? And I'm like, no, I want it just like the assignment. No interpretive dance until the final, week 6, they get to do their creative. Because, well, for one thing, cakes, you've got to follow an order to the T, or your customer will walk away and then, pan you on social media. But also, it's all about learning the technique, the ingredient function, the science, the math, the percentages, and then nailing that. And then that's what the knowledge sets you free. Like, you don't learn to become a good musician without learning the scales and learning how to read music and going through that very boring theory and all that stuff, right? It's the same with baking. An ingredient function. I've thrown a lot of spaghetti at the wall. And before I used to do a little series called Ingredient Function Friday, which nobody watched. But because I think it just bored everybody to tears. But ingredient function and math is the key for bakers to really have a strong foundation. Then you can paint fondant till the cows come home. You can get fresh strawberries into that filling and make it work. You can substitute agar for gelatin. You can then you can be Mr. Wizard. But until you take that dive, you're always like, okay, it's always awkward.
And Auguste Escoffier would be proud of that response, right? It's about the fundamentals, the foundation. And the students, our students will thank us later. When they realize that we kept the reins on them until they had a command of ingredient function. So I love that response. You're going to see that again on social media. I love that. Hey, so Chef, the name of the podcast is The Ultimate Dish. Always the toughest question. What is, in your mind, the ultimate dish?
Well, Chef, I'm going to answer that not from my point of view. I've been very fortunate to dine in some of the best places on the planet. And I credit my ex-husband for that because he's so into fine dining and it was great. But what I prefer is to answer that ultimate dish question, if you don't mind, a little bit more like from the student's point of view. What is the ultimate dish to master?
Oh, I love that.
A pastry chef. And in my point of view on that is really sort of just like when you're in training as an athlete, you begin our program and you're baking on your own, or maybe you're already established, but really strive to go for those projects, like croissants or macarons or Queen or maybe some classic desserts like the French marjolaine, or just hitting those dishes and nailing them so that it just lifts your confidence. You're like, okay, I got it. And then I'm going to go on to the next and on to the next, and then you just have, by the time you're done, you have this wonderful repertoire in your toolbox. You feel like you can take on the world. And so the ultimate dish, I think, for me, is when my students, it's more about them than about me anymore. I've sort of had my time in that regard. But week 6 of PA 135, when they have a perfect honeycomb on their croissant. They break open a macaron and there's no hollow, they haven't cracked, or their ganache is silky smooth. It doesn't always have to be shooting the moon. It can be the simplest things. And that sense of satisfaction, that deep breath that they did it, and then they move on to
which builds their confidence, which builds their, I love that. It's a beautiful answer. Perfect response. We haven't had that response from anyone yet. So thank you for that.
I really feel it from my heart.
No, I could tell.
I can tell you all sorts of ultimate dishes. We could sit here for hours. I feel,
super meaningful, so thoughtful, so appreciated. Chef, thank you for spending some time with us. This has been really, really fun. And I didn't realize we were both from Chicago, so I should have assumed we'd have a good time today. Thanks again. Thanks for everything you do for our students, and we'll do this again, okay?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chef. It was a real pleasure.
You bet. Thank you for listening to the Ultimate Dish Podcast, brought to you by Auguste Escoffier School of Culinary Arts. Visit escoffier.edu/podcast, where you'll find any materials mentioned during the podcast, including notes, links, and other resources. You can also browse other episodes and subscribe.